Hi, my name is Evan DeMarx. I'm with Professor Marandi from the University of Tehran. Professor, thank you for joining the Trends Journal today. I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure.
It's never a dull moment when it comes to the U.S. and the Middle East and Israel, and we always love having your opinion on what's going on. Obviously, the big news is the Israeli strike right now, or 2 days ago in Qatar, and the fallout from those strikes. And also it seems like the miscommunication from the White House, from the Israeli government, what's going on right now. You have Trump, who was at a restaurant the other night, saying that he had no idea before the strike occurred, even though he knows everything that's going on in the Middle East. But then you had the spokesperson say that the White House was aware of the strikes. Military analysts, who I respect, run a lot of different interviews and said there's not a chance in hell that the United States didn't know that this was going on because of our radar capabilities in the region. When you saw this happen, what was your reaction when you first learned about this Israeli strike in the heart of Qatar?
It was clear that the Americans and the Israelis did this together, because there is no way in the world that the Israelis could have gone all the way to Qatar, and the multiple American bases in Turkey, across the Persian Gulf, that they would not have detected this. And then you also have American jets flying, because they're constantly flying over Iraq and Syria and the Persian Gulf. And if there was a mysterious plane or a series of planes flying, the Americans would have taken that very seriously. In addition to that, we saw what the United States did to Iran. Trump, before the Israeli regime assault on Iran, behaved one way. The next day, he was gloating about it, basically taking credit for it. So he's dishonest. He's not a reliable person. There's not a chance in the world that these jets flew from all the way from the Mediterranean to the Persian Gulf without the Americans knowing. That's all nonsense. So what happened was that the Americans gave a fake ceasefire proposal. Then Trump, if you recall, threatened Hamas and said, "This is my final warning." So I would imagine that he wanted them all to gather to discuss this seriously. And then when they gathered, they would kill them. And that's, if you recall, that's sort of the model that that Trump had with Iran. If you recall, he was gloating about killing the Iranian leaders, and he even threatened. He told people he said, "Leave Tehran." I mean, the outrageous behavior of Trump and the inhumane behavior of Trump knows no boundaries. So it's clear as day, I think, that this was a joint operation. It was a catastrophic mistake. And the fact that they failed made it even worse, because the United States and the Israeli regime are marginalizing themselves further. They are basically telling everyone that they are not reliable. They're telling the Iranians that you cannot negotiate with us, by the way, because those in Iran who say, well, we should try to find a solution and to negotiate, now they have to answer the question, well, can you get any closer than Qatar to the United States? It is a proxy that is completely obedient to the United States. We know that Hamas is in Qatar because the Americans and the Israeli regime want it. The regime is constantly sending money to the United States. Even during the World Cup, Qatar wasted, some say wasted up to $200 billion for the World Cup. And who were the contractors for all those projects? They were all linked to American senators and American senior officials and people of influence and congressmen. That's what it's all about. So Qatar is very close to the United States, but they still get bombed. So when Qatar gets bombed, that means the Iranians can never trust the United States. And that means the Saudis, the Emiratis, they can never be sure about what will happen tomorrow. If Netanyahu tomorrow decides to bomb and murder Mohammed bin Salman, Is he going to be sanctioned? Is he going to be punished? No. He can do it and he'll get away with it. So this sends all these signals to people across the region and beyond. I think it was a foolish mistake. I think it has to do with the fact that Netanyahu needs an escalation. He needs this war to constantly be expanding and to constantly for the region to be in crisis, so that his coalition sticks together, so that he doesn't have to go to court, so that he doesn't risk his government from falling, and then, of course, subsequently probably going to jail. So this is a pattern. This follows a pattern that we've been seeing for almost 2 years now. The war on Lebanon, the war on Iran, the continued Holocaust in Gaza. These are all about Netanyahu. They're not in the interest of the Israeli regime. The Israeli regime today is much weaker than it was 2 years ago. The world hates it, despises it, and it's failed even in Gaza, even though it's slaughtering people. But it's after 2 years, it still hasn't captured this small piece of land. It's not going well for the regime, but at least for Netanyahu, he's in the prime minister's office and nowhere near a courtroom or a prison cell.
What is going on? Because CBS News today had an article on how Trump assured Qatar that there will not be another strike. And Netanyahu just came out and said he'll strike anywhere he has to, including Qatar, if they feel that that's where the terrorists are. So if you're a Qatari, what's your feeling? Do you feel a sense of relief that you're getting assurances from Donald Trump, or are you feeling a sense of impending doom because Netanyahu is now saying that no, all bets are off? What do you think the Qataris are thinking?
They should be very worried. And this is really the end of Qatar. They have lost. They stood with the Americans and basically forced the Iranians to strike the American base. Then they were bombed by the Americans themselves. Qatar has no status anymore. It has no unique position. It has no protector. It is completely vulnerable. It is, the only country that the regime in Doha should be able to trust is Iran. When the Saudis and the Emiratis conspired to undermine Doha, the only country that came to its rescue was Iran. They're the ones who prevented it from becoming fully besieged. Their airplanes would fly over Iranian territory. Iran gave permission for them to use Iranian airspace and Iranian sea routes so that they could survive. And the Iranians assisted them in different ways. And the Saudis and the Emiratis and their allies ultimately failed. And the Americans did not come to the rescue. Turkey was not in a position to do anything. It was only Iran. But as soon as the siege ended, Doha went back to its old behavior and again supported ISIS and Al Qaeda and stabbing Iran in the back as it was doing beforehand, stabbing the resistance in the back. It pretends it supports Hamas, but it doesn't. The Americans, as they admitted themselves, the Americans and Israelis asked them to have Hamas there. They've never given Hamas a single bullet, and they've worked against Hezbollah. They worked against the Syrian government, and all of this has created. And what Qatar and Turk and Erdogan have done basically is that they've created the conditions for all these attacks by the Israeli regime. They've weakened the region by promoting ISIS and Al Qaeda and damaging Syria and Lebanon and the region as a result. They brought this upon themselves. But in any case, Qatar has no protection.
Has this changed anything in the region? We saw some strongly worded statements from Qatar and from other regional powers that said, things like this are destabilizing for the region. We don't need things like this. Do you see anything changing after these strikes?
The Iranians are sometimes, they're too nice. But Qatar, I think that they know what they have to do, but they'll never be able to do it. That's the problem. These countries in the Persian Gulf, whether it's the Emirates, the Saudis, or Qatar, or Bahrain, or Kuwait, or Oman, they if they were to rebuild their relationship with Iran, rethink their relationship with Iran, then things would change. If they worked with Iran, that would be a catastrophic situation for the Israeli regime. That would bring about a catastrophe. And decades of hard work by the Israeli regime and these Arab family governments to move closer to each other would be brought to an end immediately. You would have significant economic consequences for the Israeli regime. It would strengthen the hand of these countries, but I don't see them having the will to change. And I think there will probably be some changes and there will be consequences, but not the sort of consequences that I mean, in the case of Iran, when the Israelis attacked, the Iranians hammered the Israelis day and night for 12 days. And that's what forced the regime to step back and to seek a ceasefire. What Qatar, what Qatar can do itself, or in coordination with others, is quite substantial because all of the oil and gas that comes from the Persian Gulf region, all of the money that is made from the oil and gas wealth that is created, that can bring about a lot of change. It could put a lot of pressure on the United States, on the Europeans, and of course, the Israeli regime.
Scott Ritter, who's an analyst out here, he was a former UN weapons inspector. I always like listening to him. He talked about Qatar, and he called it a subject nation to the United States. And he said, the country understands that if it pisses off the United States, will terminate their existence. He says, I mean, this is the reality of how the entire Middle East relates to the United States. That anyone who is our ally isn't our ally because we betray them all. That's what he said about Qatar, and that they should have learned something by this strike. Do you think Qatar is approaching its relationship with the U.S., at least in diplomatic conversations amongst their own leadership? Do you see this conversation going down, or is it still not something that they're even willing to discuss in Doha? They're to take a new look at their relationship with the U.S.
Well, Scott is right in that the United States has no friends. It has no allies. Its only ally is the Israeli regime. Even the Europeans are not its allies anymore. What they're doing to the Europeans is not what an ally would do. But I think Qatar, if it was to coordinate its actions with other countries like Iran, powerful countries like Iran, yes, a lot could be done. They could force the Americans to back down. They can, just like the Iranians forced the Americans and the Israeli regime to back down, Qatar, if it does things the right way, if it the Qatari, when the Saudis, the Emiratis, with the support of the United States, wanted to undermine Qatar, Iran helped it and it survived. If Qatar and Iran were to coordinate their efforts, how could the United States undermine Qatar without going to war with Iran? And if it were to coordinate with other countries and Iran, if the Persian Gulf nations came together and coordinated their efforts, the United States cannot do anything about that. Trump can do nothing.
What would Saudi Arabia do if it saw Qatar and Iran getting closer? Would the Saudis, you think, try to throw wrenches in that diplomatically, or do you think that they would join that movement?
The point is, and I'm speaking hypothetically, I'm not optimistic. I don't see the Qatari regime is just too weak and pathetic, in my opinion. I hope they behave differently, but I don't see it happening. But if I mean, the same is true with Saudi Arabia. The Israeli jets flew over Saudi Arabia. The Saudis have spent not billions of dollars over the decades. They spent trillions of dollars on weapons from the United States. They're the biggest the buyer of U.S. weapons in the world. They couldn't detect these jets flying over their airspace. They couldn't detect these jets flying over neighboring territory in Iraq and Syria. So what was all that money about? What were all those American weapons about? What are all those American fighter jets worth if they're useless then why did they purchase them? They just purchased trillions of dollars of weapons and nothing. So the Saudis have no military capabilities. If it's true that they didn't detect the flight, if they did detect the flights, then that's a different thing altogether. But I think the Saudis should feel very vulnerable, and that vulnerability creates the necessity for a rethink in foreign policy. I just don't see it happening. I don't see them taking the necessary steps to marginalize and isolate the Israeli regime. Otherwise, the smart thing to do would be to, as I said earlier, redefine their relationship with Iran, whether it's Qatar or Saudi Arabia or the Emirates. Because if they can bomb Qatar, they can bomb Saudi Arabia. And if they can bomb the Emirates, and what are they going to do in response? They have nothing. I mean,
Netanyahu said that literally he'll bomb anywhere. He said that today. If it means getting terrorists. Also, I wanted to hear your opinion, John Mearsheimer, the professor out here. He said that Israel used to prioritize when there were Israeli hostages, and that would be the top mission for Tel Aviv to get their hostages, to save hostages. He said that the bombing in Doha is further proof that hostages aren't important to the Netanyahu government, even though this is something that Israeli journalists have said, like Gideon Levy, that this is no longer the hostages are taking the backseat to the what's going on with the Greater Israel effort. Is that something that you agree with? Is this like the latest example of Netanyahu not really caring about the hostages, the fact that he would order such a strike?
Well, he never did care, did he? On October the 7th, 2023, first they lied about rapes and beheadings and cooking babies and all that nonsense. Of course, that was done by the Western media and the Israeli regime in order to justify the genocide. But the Israelis, they slaughtered hundreds of their own citizens because they wanted to prevent Hamas and its allies from taking them back to Gaza, because they didn't want them to have all these people as hostages, even though many of them were, if not most of them, if not nearly all of them, were soldiers or they were reservists. But and putting aside the fact that thousands of Palestinians are being held hostage in Israeli dungeons. But that aside, the Israelis, they slaughtered hundreds of people on October the 7th. Why did they do that? Because they didn't want to have hostages. So this is, I think, an extension of that policy from day one. I agree completely. Netanyahu does not care about the hostages. The whole point of this genocide, the whole point of all these wars for Netanyahu is at least, I mean, I don't want to say everything, but literally the whole point is preserving his coalition, remaining in power, staying out of court, and staying out of jail. For his fanatical allies, it is, of course, the nonsense that we see in the Zionist ideology and their Zionist beliefs that is important for them, which allows them to carry out this genocide. But for Netanyahu, he's not that sort of person. He's a very secular person, and he's very corrupt. And we know that Israel was pretty close to a potential civil conflict, if not a civil war, before October the 7th. So I think it's clear as day that he didn't care about the hostages or the prisoners back then, and he doesn't care about them now.
You mentioned before a hypothetical situation where MBS was killed by Israel. Is there something that would jump out at you that Israel could do that could change these Arab countries and in their approach and maybe take a harder stance against Israel? Is there something that jumps out at you, an example of an attack that would, in your view, galvanize these countries to take a firm stance against Israel? Or can Israel do anything it wants in the region? What would it take for a country like the UAE to come out and take a firm stance against what Israel is doing over there? What would you see would have to happen? What level?
Yeah, I'm sure there's going to be some changes, and I'm sure there's going to be some repercussions for the Israeli regime. and even maybe for the Americans. And there should be. I just don't think, and I hope I'm wrong, I don't think that Qatar has the courage to do what is necessary to do. So I think, yes, if the Israelis attack again, the consequences won't be all that severe. But then the more that the Israelis do that, the more we may see change take place. But the sort of change that I'm more interested in, which may actually force governments to change their policies ultimately, is the mood on the streets. The people across the region are outraged. They are they've been watching this genocide go on for 2 years, and now to see Qatar, the most subservient of, of countries in the world, be bombed in that way. First of all, it strengthens the resolve of the resistance. Hezbollah knows that there's no way that it can give up its arms, and there's no way it will allow anyone to take its arms away from it, because it looks at the example of Qatar. If Qatar is going to get bombed, then Lebanon is going to get bombed, as it is being bombed literally every day. Just don't see it in the Western media because for them it's not important. So the mood is changing, and that could create instability. And remember, these are American proxies. Jordan, Egypt, all these countries in the region, the populations are outraged. And as the empire declines, their control, hypothetically speaking, decreases. So you have increasing rage. You have a horrible economic situation too, as well. It's worse than when the Arab Spring or the Arab Awakening took place a decade and a half ago. Today, the situation. And then you have this genocide happening too, and you have the empire on the decline. That creates the potential for instability, and that instability is not good for the United States, and it's not good for the Israeli regime either.
I'd like to just end on what's going on right now in Gaza City and Gaza. We have obviously Israel's carrying out a new offensive there. Netanyahu said this is essentially the last step in snuffing out Hamas threat to Israel. We have the defense minister from Israel coming out saying how he's going to just raise the entire city unless Hamas, puts down its weapons. What do you see happening now in Gaza? Now that the population, the million or so people who are in Gaza City, are being pushed further south. The BBC just ran a report, not to be jumping all over the place, but the BBC just ran a report about the GHF employing a lot of biker gangs from an anti-Islamic biker gang in the U.S. Can you tell me what you think is going to now happen in Gaza? Is this going to just keep going? I mean, the Western governments came out against this move in Gaza City, but obviously Netanyahu is doing what he wants with the backing of the Trump administration. What do you see happening now in Gaza? Where does this end in your view?
Edmund, every day, every single day that this Holocaust continues, hatred for the Israeli regime grows across the world. And it is cemented. And it becomes irreversible. In other words, 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, people are not going to forget this. What we're seeing in Gaza City is just another chapter of this genocide, but it is outraging people even further. And they're destroying all the buildings. They're making all those people who've gathered in the remaining buildings as refugees, homeless again, without any food, without any place to go. The Israeli regime is the great evil of our time. And it just proves what the Iranians were saying from the very beginning is the fact. And that is that this regime is not a regime that can have peace. It is a supremacist regime that views others as subhuman, as animals, as cockroaches, literally as cockroaches. Target practice on kids, one day aiming at their heads, the next day at their stomachs, the next day at their sensitive spots, unplugging incubators so that infants die in hospitals. The evil that we're seeing in Gaza is unprecedented in human history because it's being shown to us live. We've been watching it for 2 years. This is not like the genocides of past where you hear about it or you read it in the newspaper or you read about it in the history books. It's taking place in front of your eyes. And then you see mainstream Western media justifying it, trying to explain how it is legitimate and how, in fact, they're doing the right thing. The same people who, just until a few years ago, they were worried about animal rights in our part of the world. They were worried about women's rights and children's rights and transgender rights and all that. But now they're trying to formulate arguments to justify Holocaust. The Israeli regime has failed. They've lost this war. And Hamas is still very much there, and so are their allies, Islamic Jihad and the others. They're underground. We just saw recently another operation where they killed a number of Israelis, and that will continue. But I don't think this is going to end. I have no doubt that this will not end well for the Israeli regime. The regime is this, when you are despised, that means you are delegitimized in the eyes of the world. And we have to remember, when I was young, I was an activist for Palestine and apartheid South Africa, against apartheid. And I did work for the ANC, translated materials for journals in Persian and that sort of thing. But I never thought I would see the collapse of apartheid South Africa. Or at least I never thought it would end the way it did. I thought it was going to be a very, very, very long struggle. But then it just fell apart. So the Israelis may look strong at times, but the damage that they've done to themselves, even in the United States, is irreversible. And they've signed their own death warrant.
Professor Marandi, on that note, thank you for joining the Trench Journal. We always appreciate having you on.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's always a pleasure.